Hello, everybody. So obviously there was much hubbub about today's testimony by James Comey before a Senate hearing, and there's far too much there to address in one video. What I did want to talk about is one narrow aspect of what was said, and this pertains to a story that INTYT reported yesterday on the channel and also on Medium. We basically reported that while the DNC had been contracted, let me start over. While the DNC had contracted with the private cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike to assess its servers after they were allegedly hacked or breached, CrowdStrike was also under contract with the FBI for unspecified technical services. And that pertains to something that happened in today's hearing, and I want to just explicate that for you here. So Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina is a Republican, chair or co-chair of the Senate committee, and here's one of the questions that he asked Comey. Burr says, quote, "And the FBI in this case, unlike other cases that you might investigate, did you ever have access to the actual hardware that was hacked? Or did you have to rely on a third party to provide you the data that they had collected?" Comey responds, "In the case of the DNC, we did not have access to the devices themselves. We got relevant forensic information from a private party, a high-class entity that had done the work, but we didn't get direct access." So we had already known that. I mean, that had been already confirmed in so many words, but now that is Comey being more explicit than he has previously been about the fact that the DNC never turned over its servers to any kind of government entity so that they could assess for themselves the technical claims underlying the allegation that Russia was responsible for hacking into the servers and exfiltrating its data. That's pretty remarkable. It's amazing to me, for one thing, that so few people are interested in the implications of this, because what are the implications? The implications are that it is being left to a small group of for-profit actors, meaning people who are in an institution like CrowdStrike, which is a profit-seeking firm. It's being left to them to render conclusions that have huge geopolitical consequences. And when you have that task left to a for-profit entity, their primary motivation is always going to be profit. They're not accountable to the general public as a government entity would be. They're not accountable to the wider populace. They're accountable to their investors and funders. And for one thing, although Comey doesn't state CrowdStrike by name, that's the entity that we know had primary access to the servers because they were contracted by the DNC in 2016. And another interesting thing that Comey does here is he basically gives CrowdStrike yet another PR boost. He calls CrowdStrike. I mean, we have to assume that he's referring to CrowdStrike here because there's nobody else that he could be referring to, presumably. He refers to CrowdStrike as, quote, a high-class entity. So now, apparently, it's seen as totally standard and expected for the government, in this case the FBI, to outsource crucial investigative functions to private firms. And then once a private firm gathers the relevant investigative information, that information becomes proprietary, meaning they have a vested interest in not provisioning that data to other entities for replication. Like in a peer review scenario, you give your findings to your colleagues and peers so that they can duplicate it and ensure that your analysis is accurate. Whereas in the case of CrowdStrike, and this has happened in other instances of so-called cyber attribution, the information is essentially privatized and becomes the exclusive domain of whatever entity or company has been contracted to render those findings. And, that would be, if this was just a kind of private company that wanted to keep its affairs, on the down low, mean, that would be one thing. But this now is being, the findings that CrowdStrike has provisioned are being used as the basis for geopolitical narratives that are potentially exceptionally catastrophic. And therefore, I think it's just incredible that more accountability isn't being demanded. And here's Burr following up on the question. And note that it's left to the Republicans on the committee to even approach this subject, as if it's somehow inherently right-wing to wonder why the FBI is privatizing these critical functions. If anything, that's more the purview of the left, you would think. But because, for some reason, all these concerns are dismissed as somehow, trying to excuse Trump or Russia, there's not much interest in probing this really consequential development that's just kind of being allowed to continue without any check. So here's what here's what Burr continues by saying. So Burr says, but no content was provided, and Comey says, correct. Burr continues, isn't content an important part of the forensics from a counterintelligence standpoint? Comey says, it is, but what was briefed to me by the people who were my folks at the time is that they had gotten the information from the private party that they needed to understand the intrusion by the spring of 2016. So the private party provided a briefing. According to Comey, the CrowdStrike didn't even provide the technical evidence. It provided a briefing to people in the FBI, and then that, again, was used as the basis to formulate this wider narrative. And, Comey is using this also as the basis for his assertion that he has, quote, no doubt that the Russian government was behind these various cyber intrusions. And he affirmed that once again today. So my point is, this at very least needs to be discussed a lot more and litigated. And the notion that there was an active FBI contract underway between the FBI and CrowdStrike at the same time as the DNC was using CrowdStrike as its proxy for doing PR related to this hack and for crafting certain explanations or conclusions about the perpetrators of the hack or alleged hack. I mean, this is really kind of untested territory, and for some reason, there's a very conspicuous lack of interest on the part of especially liberal media to attempt to interrogate the underlying presumptions here. And I think that's worrisome. I mean, there's a lot more in this hearing that obviously merits attention, and there definitely is a case that Trump potentially obstructed justice, although whether that is impeachable is another question. There's a political dimension there. There are legal dimensions. So again, it's a plausible case. It just has to be elucidated further before anybody, I think, can opine on it with any certainty. But at the same time, you have 99.9% of attention from the hearing on that issue, which again is legitimate, but this gets completely ignored, even though it's, once again, I have to just keep repeating this, but this private analysis is serving as the basis for the overall Russian collusion narrative or Russian interference narrative. And, one lesson that I think should be drawn is that on the eve of the French election last month, it was reported and wildly circulated that Russia, quote unquote, had hacked the Macron campaign servers and released emails. Well, that was assumed at the time to be Russia. You have members of Congress like Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, repeating the claim that Russia was responsible for that Macron campaign hack. And what was the reason why it was associated with Russia? It was because you had private firms such as CrowdStrike immediately proclaiming that Russia was behind this Macron hack. But then, just a few days ago, once the actual French intelligence services assessed the servers in question, they concluded that there was no evidence that Russia was culpable for the hack. And that should be a lesson here. Why isn't it that if this is such a if the hack of the DNC servers was so utterly consequential, then why wasn't that why weren't the servers submitted to relevant entities which could corroborate CrowdStrike's findings? I think people need to be very cognizant of that. And that will do it for now. Please go look at that story. It's on the channel, on the YouTube channel from yesterday. There is a supplementary Medium piece that kind of gets into a little more detail. And that's that for now. Have a great day.